Hello, welcome to my video, and today we're going to be discussing a book that I enjoyed very much, and I binge read in a very short amount of time considering how big it is, and that book is The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, book 2 in his very famous and renowned The Wheel of Time series. And any reservations I had about this series after reading the first book in the series, The Eye of the World, were handled and settled after reading this book. I was partially convinced that even though The Wheel of Time has so much love for it and is very popular, that it was just another chosen one story. And it is not. It is not. This book is so much more than just your usual stereotypical run-of-the-mill chosen one story, epic fantasy. I'm just going to say, book was amazing. I cried once during it. So this book's cry score, 1. Not the most tear-jerking read, but I had a lot of emotions, especially towards the end. Robert Jordan did a very good job at expanding this already massive world and making it a lot more interesting and making the conflicts between all these various factions a lot more complex. So I very much enjoyed seeing this world become a little bit more complex. And I'm very interested to see how the rest of this humongous series goes, because so much changed just in between the first book and the second book. And even though we still have mainly the same main characters, the world has been expanded. The supporting cast of characters are a lot more interesting and they're a lot more center stage. So I'm very excited to see where the series goes. So let me talk about the things that I really enjoyed about this book, and then I'll talk about the things that maybe I didn't really enjoy very much. Let me start off by saying The Great Hunt is a little bit darker than The Eye of the World. The Eye of the World is definitely traditional fantasy. It talks about all these dark themes, but really doesn't focus in on them. The Great Hunt lets you get a little bit more in the nitty-gritty of things, and really get to see how evil individuals can be. And the tone is a little bit more grown up. So I appreciate that as an avid reader of grimdark fantasy. As stated earlier, Robert Jordan made his already massive setting, this world that he created in The Eye of the World. He made it so much bigger in The Great Hunt. He added several different layers I was not anticipating. He introduced various other factions who have all their own motivations and histories. And he made the factions that we were introduced to in the first novel a little bit more complex and realistic. And I like some depth to the conflict inside my stories. And I'm just very excited to see all these political maneuverings between all these various factions happen throughout the series. So that was something I was very excited to see. One thing Robert Jordan is doing very well in this series, that he started in The Eye of the World and he continued in The Great Hunt, he does a very good job at doing like a little power creep. Because we're seeing individuals grow larger than life. We're seeing everyday farm boys become legends. And I'm very excited to see how our characters grow and become more powerful and influence the world around them more. And it's just very interesting to see how myths and legends grow. And I think he does a very good job at slowly making that happen. And that's one thing that I'm very excited about for the rest of the series. The Great Hunt definitely gave me a lot of motivation to really rush through this series, if it's possible. I'm not sure if you can rush through The Wheel of Time, but I'm going to try. And I had the motivation to do so because I want to see this power creep I've heard of happen. One thing about myths that Robert Jordan is doing a very good job at showing and describing is how various cultures will have similar myths and legends. And even though the main story is very similar, there are slightly different attributes of these myths and stories that people are going to focus on. And he does a good job at kind of explaining and showing how one culture will have the exact same ideas, but the focus will be slightly different, and how all these different cultures build a more complete mosaic of the legend. And it just makes me super excited to see this already huge world get even bigger, and to see how all these different cultures bring another little piece of the puzzle to give the reader a more complete picture. So I'm very excited to see how he does that. I wasn't expecting to have that to look forward to in this series. I wasn't aware it was going to be that complex. that interesting, but I think there's really going to be something special here in that regard. I am very early into Robert Jordan's masterpiece, but I am already aware of how much he's influenced the fantasy genre in its entirety, and how he's influenced it for the better. And I was afraid that this series would seem dated when I read it, but it is definitely seeming and reading like a very modern story. And I'm very excited that I don't have to lower my expectations. And I feel kind of prideful for thinking I have to lower my expectations when I read this monster titan of the fantasy genre. And I'm just super excited. Now I would like to move on to the things I didn't particularly care for about The Great Hunt. And the main thing is, it followed a very similar formula to The Eye of the World. A lot of the act structure is very similar, and it made it kind of predictable. So that was but a great story is still a great story, and sometimes they follow the same framework and pattern. But that's one thing I noticed, and it kind of was distracting. Another thing I did not like, which I'm certain is now just a stylistic choice of his, is Robert Jordan's immense descriptions of every little thing. Not like Tolkien. Like, he doesn't describe the history of a tree or a specific weapon very much, but the clothing. I have never once, while reading a fantasy book, wanted to be able to perfectly understand and have described to me the threadwork of some character's dress. I'm never going to remember that. As a reader, I do not focus on those things. Perhaps it'll help out people who are making this series into a TV adaptation, because Robert Jordan literally gives you everything you need to know about the setting. But it makes for a much longer read. But maybe that's just a me thing. Maybe you as a reader will very much care about what every culture wears, the colors they prefer, the patterns they like on their dresses. I didn't care for that. I don't remember a lot of the things, and maybe if I reread this series, I would come to care and love all those little intricate details. But for now, when I'm trying to read 100 books in a year, maybe I resent the immense amount of detail Robert Jordan throws at the reader. But that's just me. There was one thing about The Eye of the World that bugged me a little bit, that I thought I could overlook, and I thought it wouldn't bother me anymore. But The Great Hunt proved me wrong. It is Robert Jordan's seeming inability to make a relationship seem realistic and to have that relationship develop organically. And it is much worse in The Great Hunt. There is one character in particular who was pretty boring and relatively uninteresting, besides the fact that he's one of the main characters. But every character he meets seems to be in love with him. And there's kind of like a plot device in this series that kind of shows why all these characters are compelled to like him. But it seems like very lazy writing, because all of a sudden this character goes from being liked by like one person to being liked by like 5 characters in the book. And we're not really given a lot of reason why, besides the fact that they just do. And maybe Robert Jordan will explain those things. Maybe he'll make it seem more organic. But I don't think so. So hopefully the romances start to make some sense. Because there are some characters I was not expecting to catch the feelings for this character. So the romance, relatively ham-fisted in this book, that's for sure. And it's starting to bother me. It's starting to bother me as we meet more characters, because you kind of expect, as the cast of characters grows, the relationships will kind of branch out. But the relationships are all kind of focusing on the same few characters, and the relationships from before aren't resolved. So it's like not even a love triangle. It's like a love pyramid. You know, there's one person here, and all these other people are liking this character. So it's like it's kind of like I'm watching The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. Everyone's interested in one character, and there's kind of little, nitpicks that they throw at each other because they all like the same character, and I'm not liking it. Before I move on to the spoilers, I just want to say, in conclusion, I loved The Great Hunt. I liked the pacing of it. It was a much faster read than The Eye of the World. I like the new characters that were introduced to me. I like the new cultures and conflicts that were introduced. I like how the world is a lot bigger and more complex. And I'm very excited to see where all these story lines and plot lines go. And it made me cry once. The cry count is 1 for The Eye of the World. And I feel like the climax of this book was handled very well. I got the chills at the end of this book, and I can't wait to give The Dragon Reborn a try. Thus begins the spoiler part of the video. And I have some predictions and theories about this series, and about the romances, and about who these characters are. And I want to talk about a few of them. The first theory I want to talk about is that I think Landfire and Celine are the same person. Landfire has loved the dragon for it seems like many cycles of the wheel. And I found Celine's vast knowledge of everything very suspicious. So I think she's evil, or she's Landfire. Maybe she actually loves Rand. Maybe she just wants to take advantage of him. Maybe she wants to use the dragon for his power and his influence. But yes, do not like Celine. But when Landfire appeared in the final act of this book, I'm like, maybe that is Celine, because you see her from the point of view of men. And speaking of men, she is a character that I know a lot of people love. I don't know why, because I avoided spoilers online and in the forums and on Reddit. But Min is very likable. I like her a lot. She's in love with Rand for some reason. We don't get context for why. And it doesn't make much sense. But Min is in love with Rand. And I think they're going to have a romance one day. And speaking of romances, I think either Rand is going to marry several characters and they are going to die off, or he's going to date a bunch of different people. But my main theory regarding the romances and love interests of Rand al'Thor is, I think there's going to be a polygamy angle in this. Maybe the dragon has several wives, because Min talks to, the prince, the heir of the kingdom, the princess, and heir of the kingdom. She says, well, you're going to share your husband with several women. And she happens to like Rand as well, because, she's a young woman character in this book, and they're all in love with Rand al'Thor. But I think Rand's either going to have like a wife and several, side pieces, concubines, I'm not sure, sister wives, or he's going to be married to several of them, or maybe he'll have several personalities and each one will be married to somebody else. But I'm very intrigued and interested to see how Robert Jordan and perhaps Brandon Sanderson later on in the series kind of tackles all these romantic subplots, because they're kind of burying me in them. Rand has like 5 romantic subplots now, and they all can't work. And maybe they'll all die off, and it'll end up with Egwene at the end. Maybe he marries the princess and becomes the king, as well as the Dragon Reborn. Maybe he'll marry Min, a character I like, very strong woman character, but seems very boyish, and maybe Rand's too shallow, and maybe he won't pick her. Maybe Celine's not evil. Maybe he ends up being with Celine. Maybe he ends up married to the random farm girl that kind of flirted with him in The Eye of the World, but now is at Tar Valon. A lot of things are happening. And I just really want to see, Perrin, date somebody. I still think Perrin and Egwene might possibly happen. I really do hope that happens. I think Perrin deserves somebody. I really like Perrin and Rand al'Thor's mutual admiration for each other. They both think they're bad with women, and they both think the other person's good with women. So I just want to see Perrin get some womanly attention, because Rand gets all of it, and he's not deserving. He's my least favorite character in the book. He's super whiny. He doesn't want to do anything, and maybe it's because I know Chosen Ones always end up doing Chosen One stuff at the end of books and series. But his whining's getting pretty old. We've all seen the reluctant Chosen One trope happen, and Rand al'Thor knows he is the Chosen One. And now, in 2 books, he has done very heroish things towards the end. And yes, I would just like to see, Rand grow into a character that I can like. I know Nynaeve's going to end up with Lan. I think he's going to end up being her warder. She's going to be a green Aja, Aes Sedai, and marry him. I think Moraine's now going to die, so that way her link to Lan can be severed, and then he can be linked to Nynaeve. But maybe Moiraine dies but doesn't really die, and then the link is somehow, the link is somehow undone, and Lan ends up with Nynaeve, and then Moraine comes back, and maybe there's conflict there, because I guess Moraine and Lan could still end up together. But I'm definitely not thinking they're romantic after the Great Hunt. I think it's like a mutual, like, platonic type of love between them. The part of the book that gave me goosebumps was when Matt blew the horn at the end, and all the old heroes came back, and I just got I cried a little bit. I thought it was such a beautifully done scene, and I could instantly feel the camaraderie between all these characters, and you could feel their love and affection for Rand, or at least, Lews Therin, who Rand is a reincarnation of. And that scene was so beautifully done. The climax of The Great Hunt was amazing. Chills, goosebumps. I was hyped after I read it. I think Robert Jordan has really good beginnings. He kind of has a slog in the middle, but he's pulled off both endings to both of the books I've read from him so far. And the ending's the most important part of a book. And if he pulls off endings like this every time, I could really, really understand why this series is so fondly remembered and still well loved to this day. I don't have too many more predictions about the Wheel of Time. It's so early in this journey to make any big predictions, and I see so much things that I think are foreshadowing. And I was very surprised to feel that post-book depression at the end of The Great Hunt, because it's only book 2. There's so much more left to read. And I can't imagine how cathartic and beautiful this journey is going to seem at the very end of it. And I'm kind of nervous to finish this series. I hear there's not really a series that quite fills the void after reading The Wheel of Time. And I'm a glutton for punishment. I want to feel the longing after I finish this series. And I can't wait to possibly want to reread this series again. I want to understand, even more so than I do now, why this series is so well loved and well received. And I can't wait to read the rest of the series and to make videos about it, to cover it on this channel. And I'm excited for you guys to be along for the journey with me. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel. I'll be reading a lot more books, and I'll be making book review videos about it. And, push that like button if you like this video. Leave a comment, and I'll talk to you guys next time.